Então, novamente, boa tarde.
Once again, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to start this session. Brazil, more action ahead. It's a crucial year for the country. The country is going to face challenges, as many others, but that has a lot of opportunities as well. And we need to keep on the agenda some very important topics in such a tumultuous time, in this geopolitical context. So we have a panel that's going to discuss the economy, economic growth, energy transition, environmental aspects, social aspects, and, of course, in light of growth, because we've had 3 years of economic growth, 3% per year on average, and we're implementing a series of changes, economic reform, tax reform, with the hope of changing the context for the country. Last year, we had the leadership of G20. This year, we will have COP30 as well as BRICS. So both of these processes that we are presiding this year are very complex, and we need to keep on the agenda, especially in light of the changes that came with Trump's inauguration yesterday, the issue of environmental and climate change. We are a green power, not just because we have a wealth of biodiversity, but also because we produce food and we need a transition for that production to be more low carbon and to ensure food security as well. In terms of renewable energy, Brazil has a very different energy mix compared to global energy mixes. 90% of our electricity matrix is renewable, which is very relevant. And we also have a series of responsibilities. In environmental terms, we have 60% of rainforests. They are located in Brazil, 60% of the world's rainforests with the Amazon, and we have a series of plans to try and align all the different possibilities in light of the challenges that, of course, we are going to have to discuss here as well. So let me introduce the different members of our panel. We have Luís Roberto Barroso. He's the current president of the Federal Supreme Court of Brazil. We have Luana Marques Garcia Ozemela. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer of iFood Brazil. We have Barbalho, governor of the state of Pará, and Eduardo Paes, mayor of Rio de Janeiro. First, I'd like to ask Chief Justice Roberto Barroso to talk a little bit about the current situation in Brazil. We are committed to a just green transition. This is led by the federal government, but last year we signed a pact for ecological transformation, and this at all 3 levels of government, federal, state, and municipal. What challenges do we have to implement this? Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. When I started looking at environmental aspects back at Rio 92, a while ago, our concern was precisely towards future generations. It was about intergenerational justice, and now this is no longer the case because climate change, environmental changes, global warming, this has become an issue for right now, for the present, with violations that are taking place or a certain threat to these violations. So we had floods in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, the biggest drought, the longest drought in the Amazon, and of course a lot of fires, wildfires in the Pantanal region. So in light of this context, we need to have a discussion and try and understand what we could do at the judicial level. The Brazilian judiciary, just to give you a sense, in our constitution, we have a series of decisions that have been made by the Brazilian judiciary, for instance, to have a fund to try and get the protection agency IBAMA back on track, to try and fight the wildfires in the Pantanal. So we do a lot in that sense, the Brazilian justice, that is, and of course the Supreme Court. And with the other branches of government, we created this pact for a transition, an ecological transition, to try and mobilize public authorities towards this common agenda, which is to fight climate change together. So it's a pact with a series of legislative, administrative, and judiciary measures to try and fight climate change, climate issues, and we're going to act on three axes. First of all, the territorial management of the land, which is a huge problem we have. The second is energy transition, and the third is sustainable development. The pact, fortunately, Ilona, has already led to some practical results that are quite relevant. For the legislative branch, they were able to accelerate some projects. We approved a legal framework for the carbon market implementation. We also approved a legal framework to be able to produce offshore wind power, and also to regulate biofuel production. This is for the legislative branch. At the judiciary level, as one of the priorities, because we have a series of targets that we establish every year for the judiciary, and we have given priority, absolute priority, to everything that has to do with land tenure. And in our Justice Council, we approved a resolution that states that the 91 courts of the country have to make a plan where they will present all their emissions, so an emissions inventory with a reduction program for this, a program for reducing these emissions, and a program to compensate the emissions they cannot reduce. For the executive branch, and I will come to a close soon, with the different notaries for land registration, we're going to create a unified register, because in Brazil there are many different registers depending on what kind of property it is, and the country doesn't really control very well what is public land, what is private land, which means that it's difficult to fight land grabbing and other kinds of crimes that have to do with land tenure. So we are currently gathering all this information to a single database so that we can operate and work with the data that we collect. So these are some of the practical measures that we're going to be implementing. Of course, there will be many others, and this is all under the umbrella of the pact that we've mentioned. It's very important to emphasize that we have federal level plans, or plans at the federal level, at the state level, and now we're going to align the different plans so that we can really meet our NDCs, our nationally determined contributions. I think the pact has a connection with the program for a safer Amazon, with a Brazilian investment platform that was launched with the Brazilian Development Bank. And a lot has been done at the subnational level. So let me go straight to Governor Helder Barbalho. He has made huge efforts to lead this just green transition because of the responsibility you have in your state. So much of the Amazon is there. So tell us a little bit about the park you've created and what you're going to be doing. So let's just start about the plan for Pará, and later on we might talk about Brazil's commitments in light of the Paris Agreement. Good afternoon, everyone. Ilona, Minister Justice Barroso, Luana, Mayor Paes. The state of Pará in 2019 made a decision to change its model for land use and its overall strategy for state development. We need to remember that Pará had a very extractivist program or model that it was following, and it was one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters from land use amongst all the other states in Brazil. And when we made a decision to change this model, looking at the fact that we have 75% of our land that is forest and that we can produce a lot of food and produce a lot of ore in our country as well. We have, for example, 26 million heads of cattle. We're the second biggest producer. So it was kind of difficult to make it all happen. So we had to start by looking at environmental crimes, trying to reduce deforestation, fires, and illegal land grabbing. And comparing 2019 to 2024, we have seen a reduction of more than 50% in terms of deforestation from 2019 to 2024. So that was the first step. The second step is how to create a new rationale for using this land, how we're going to grow food there, how we're going to have animals being bred there as well. So there was a series of measures changing this perspective of having to advance into new land, but rather intensifying what you do with the land you already have. And from 2021 to 2024, we were able to increase by 3 million the number of heads of cattle while reducing by 42% deforestation. So it's possible to increase production, cattle production, while reducing deforestation. However, we needed to develop the idea that the forest has a value. This is a very important topic. Throughout history, we've seen that having a standing forest didn't allow you to develop, so it was more profitable to cut trees down rather than to keep them standing, to keep these trees there, because you needed to generate some revenue, some economy there, and that's how it had been done. So based on that, we looked at another way of doing things. We established a bioeconomy plan. We looked at all the different products that have to do with this biodiversity that exists in the forest, how we could scale up, generate a new economy, looking especially at some food, cosmetics, pharmaceutical products, bioconstruction materials as well, which is a way for us to generate value for that forest while it is standing. And then we created a carbon market. The state of Pará is the first state in Brazil to already trade carbon, a carbon that you emit by proving that you've been able to reduce deforestation. If we compare 2018 to 2022, we were looking at, on average, how much the state was deforesting, and then we look at 2023, how much we actually deforested, what the reduction was, and today we're able to certify 300 million tons of carbon credits that can be emitted. We've already emitted 12 million, which generated 12 million tons, which generated 1 billion reais. This has already been traded and sold to companies such as Amazon, Bayer, BCG, H&M, Walmart, the United States government, the UK government, the Norwegian government, and right now, Justice Barroso, we're going to try and establish how this is allocated. So how much of this that we are able to trade and collect goes to indigenous peoples, to local communities, to family agriculture, and a smaller part will go to the state. And whatever goes to the state, we are obliged to apply these resources in other measures that foster deforestation. So I cannot take these resources that I get and use it elsewhere. I have to continue investing in deforestation. So this was another initiative that was very important. And a third point I'd like to highlight is specifically the concessions. We're having concessions for forest forest land for management. This is for all the forests that are already standing and that we want to preserve. And today, looking at our NDCs, we also have to restore forests. We cannot just stick to preserving and to going to zero deforestation. We have to reforest and recover all these areas. And for the first time, we are going to have a restoration concession, 10,000 hectares, which was the area that was most under pressure from cattle breeding in the Amazon. It's Apa Triunfo, as it's known, in the region of Xingu. And now in March, we will be at the São Paulo Stock Exchange to have this concession be official so that we can restore this area. We will be selling credits from the restoration, and we will also be managing the forest. I want to emphasize also projects that we have in terms of payment for environmental services. We pay a certain amount per hectare of preserved land. We are paying 1,000 hectares for preserved forests, so this allows us to have resources, both private and public, to try and scale up all the different initiatives I mentioned. So we see that we start by fighting crime, and we provide a series of alternatives, of possibilities to improve land use, intensify production, so we will continue to be a big food producer. But we no longer look at Pará as a state that has mining and food production as the only possibilities, since 75% of its territory is forest. This forest needs to be monetized. It needs to generate wealth for the state, for the people, because we need to use that forest for social transformation. We cannot be happy to live near the most beautiful and well-managed forest and still have very severe social problems, poverty, among others. So we believe that with this project, we will have a new, more sustainable development model for the state. Thank you very much, Governor. We see how much you've taken on, but we also invite the international community to come and join all these projects. To talk a little bit about sustainability, the private sector, and the role of the private sector. Because, of course, we want to have a dialogue as happened in Azerbaijan, and we hope it will happen in COP30. The private sector has been key, and Luana, you are the head, the sustainability officer for a very important company. Tell us what you do and how technological innovation can help us at a time where we really need to take a huge leap ahead. Good afternoon. First of all, it's a pleasure and an honor being here to represent the voice of the private sector and beyond the private sector, the productive sector in a new economy, the economy of digital platforms. It's a very young industry. It's 20 years old, even less. And it has created a series of opportunities, and it has broadened access to income and employment possibilities at a very fast pace. So I'm here to share with you the agenda that we have within iFood. It's a very robust agenda that looks at how to show the private sector that you can improve your brand, you can improve, you can grow, you can contribute to the country's overall economic growth while attracting talent, while fostering a positive internal culture. So let me tell you what iFood is. iFood isn't just an app where you go to order food. It's one of the 3 biggest technology companies in Latin America. We represent 0.5% of a country's GDP, a country that's among the biggest in the 10 biggest in the world. So we contribute to 1 million jobs every year, direct or indirect.
o que a gente traz em termos dessa
And
agenda,
our contribution
de modelo de negócio,
to the business model and to this agenda,
delivery de comida,
beyond being a food delivery service,
múltiplas, é também a expansão
we
de
also
serviços financeiros
provide
empreendedores que atuam
financial services for small and micro entrepreneurs. We already have 400,000 small entrepreneurs that currently use our platform.
Então, só para vocês terem ideia, quando a gente compra
and this accounts for 40% of our income. So if you buy sushi on iFood, this is going to generate value in a very big chain, all the way from fishing to transportation, but we know that in this value chain, there are a series of challenges, but also a series of opportunities. What can technology allow us to do? What can be our contribution, not only economic contribution? It's a lot about connectivity. Small companies and micro companies in Brazil have been working as people worked 30 years ago. So it's also about new technology, digital transformation for these small businesses, and our own prosperity depends on the prosperity of all of these single players. So our work is also to connect them to this digital transformation to allow them to be players as well. And iFood Brazil is always looking at how to grow exponentially using AI models. We already have more than 50 of our own models for artificial intelligence. They are able to increase our EBITDA by 30% monthly. So we truly believe that the potential of artificial intelligence is something that we are already seeing, and it's already translating into more growth, more valuation, more revenue, but this artificial intelligence also needs to be used so that we seek social impact. And today we have some AI models that are being used to broaden access for adult education, for example, to create more safety on the road, to try and avoid fraud, making it easier for people who use these platforms to work, and safer as well. I think with time, in the sustainability world, we've learned a lot from our mistakes, and we're transparent about it. We have said before that we tried doing things on our own, and it didn't work. So we need collaboration. Brazil has the biggest amount of motorcycle in the West. 32 million motorcycles are used in Brazil. However, we know that the infrastructure for charging these, if they were to be electric, is lacking. As a company, we cannot get there alone. We used to invest a lot to try and neutralize our emissions, and now we redirected our efforts, and we're actually looking at investing in reduction of emissions, of carbon emissions. Because motorcycle, if they're electric, if they're clean, this has a direct impact on the income of these delivery men and women. Fuel accounts for 70% of these people's costs. And we decided to invest to try not only to avoid emitting carbon in the atmosphere, but also because we know that this is going to represent a very important reduction in their expenses and therefore in their profit. We were already able to avoid 25,000 carbon emissions, tons of carbon emissions. This is something that we believe in, and we hope to continue collaborating with these government in this sense. And at the same time, we want to accelerate investments in infrastructure so that the energy mix of these electric motorcycles can exist.
Para isso, a gente, então, decidiu lançar aqui no fórum uma
And so here at the
plataforma
forum, we've decided to launch a collaborative
eletromobilidade, uma
platform
plataforma que
for
deve
electromobility.
destravar
This is a
cerca de
platform
bilhão de
that's
nos
going
próximos
to
anos
unleash
para
$1
investimento em
billion
CAPEX,
in
que vai
investments,
desde
CAPEX
aluguel de
investments, all the
startups que
way
alugam,
from
motos elétricas até
rent
produção,
for
plantas de
these
produção.
startups that
Então, a
use
COP
the
é
motorcycles, the electric
uma oportunidade
motorcycles.
incrível para
So
mostrar
COP
como que o
is
setor
going to
privado,
be
empresas
a
do
very
setor privado
important
como a
opportunity to
iFood,
show
estão
how
promovendo essas
private companies
inovações
such as
e
iFood are
como que a
promoting
colaboração e a
innovation and how
cooperação é cada vez
collaboration and
mais
cooperation
fundamental
is
para a gente levar
essential
a inovação a um nível de exponencialidade.
so that we can really have innovation be increased in an exponential way. So this is perfect for us to go to Mayor Eduardo Paes. The environmental agenda has a lot to do with the city's agenda, because in the Amazon, we think about it as a forest, but there are a lot of people living there as well, and the same goes for urban zones. Mayor Paes was the director of the C40. He works on a day-to-day basis to try and adapt his city to climate change. He had the G20 event last year. A lot of events happened in Rio de Janeiro. I come from Rio de Janeiro. I love the state of Pará, and I live in the city of Rio, and I love it even more. So tell us a little bit more about the role of cities in terms of resilience, adaptation, and also the role of the city of Rio de Janeiro as one that has established this topic in a global platform.
Good afternoon to all of you. I'd like to greet all of the participants of this panel. First of all, there's a very important fact taking place this year. I thought that Governor Elder was going to stress this a little more. It's the fact that we're going to host COP30 at the city of Belém. I think this was a very important step taken by President Lula with the help and the pressure of Governor Elder, of course, because it sheds light on the importance of preserving the Amazon, but always remembering that there is a lot of people who live there. Those who are here or who are watching us on streaming and who are not Brazilians think that Governor Barbalho is the governor of a bunch of trees and animals, but that is not so. There are many people living in urban centers in the Amazon. Governor Elder and I met us in the previous two COPs. I don't want to create an international incident here, but they were not the most amenable environments for us to discuss environmental matters, which I think that we will have in Belém. It also sheds light on how far cities are from the discussions of sustainability. 70% of the emissions around the world are coming from cities, so it's not a problem of countries. It's a problem of urban areas. This is why how organizations like the C40 that I have presided take care of. And Minister Barroso, it's something very interesting, because when you deal, for instance, with the goals of the Paris Agreement, with the notion of subnational governments, we decrease political risks. For example, the United States and President Trump, who took office yesterday, the first thing he announced again was the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. This will, of course, have an impact because of the importance of the United States. But from the concrete point of view, there's a network of the major American cities who are those who are mostly responsible for emissions in the United States, who have these commitments in assuring that the American goals are are complied with. So there is a diplomatic game involving cities there too. So going back to this, the great challenge, and this is such a favorable environment for this because there's so much private money here. The challenge is how to pay this bill. How do we fund the changes in infrastructure cities need in order to change their infrastructure? How do you electrify public transportation? How do you deal with solid waste? How do you build sanitation infrastructure? Who pays for this bill? Cities need $3 trillion a year to fund and put into place actions for mitigation and adaptation concerning climate changes. Last year, together with Ms. Hidalgo from Paris and Jeff Sachs, we try to see how we can find this money. National governments, because of their fiscal constraints, have little possibility of funding subnational governments. And Brazil is a beautiful example, which is the PAC, the Growth Acceleration Program. But the difficulty is how cities and states capture these credits. 60% of the countries do not allow subnational governments to originate abroad. They do not give their guarantees. So as a final product, and of course there are many steps to be complied with, the thing is how we create a green fund, a guarantor fund for cities that provide this possibility for the private sector to contribute with resources. And by the way, Governor Elder, subnational governments are more trustworthy in paying their credits than other kinds of government. So the private sector has the money. Subnational governments and cities have a major ability to deliver and to eliminate those challenges, but the difficulty is the guarantee that would have to come, say, from central governments. So I'm speaking less as the mayor of Rio, but more as a mayor of the Global South. And this happens in particular in the cities of the Global South. I see COP30 this year, and more specifically, the fact that will take place in a large city like Belém, right in the middle of the forest. I see this as a new opportunity of resolving once and for all the funding problem of cities of the Global South. We discuss this in a forum like this, and we have to debate it because this is how we're going to change people's lives and eliminate the sustainability and climate challenges ahead of us. Now, going back to Governor Elder, can you talk a little bit about the Belém agenda? I think there's many changes that are taking place, and it should be a COP that welcomes everybody. We have a quicker round now, like 2 minutes for everybody so that we can reach the end. Thank you very much, Eduardo Paes, for your comments. And in fact, we have an extraordinary opportunity before us, an opportunity for Brazil for leading the sustainability and environmental agenda. If I may, I would have loved to have taken this COP to Rio de Janeiro, but there we are. I am absolutely sure, but you are a VIP guest to our Belém COP, if you please. So I think that this is a wonderful opportunity, the symbol of of holding a COP in the Amazon with due respect to the Baku COP leaders who are honoring us with their presence here at the audience. We have come from 2 COPs in countries that have their economies based on fossil fuels. So to hold the COP in the Amazon after Dubai and after Baku is a clear message being given by the UN in choosing an Amazon city. It's a clear message of Brazil when it breaks with the paradigm of making this big diplomatic event that deals with the economy, with social matters and energy changes. Rio de Janeiro might have been changes that would perhaps have been the natural choice, as would São Paulo and Brasilia. And Brazil has been paying for the benefit of the doubt here, but this should all be seen as a secondary matter, because Brazil is breaking with a paradigm, making people discuss the environment with their foot in the forest, to see from a close distance to live what is to live in the Amazon. We have the greatest biodiversity in the world, fauna and tropical flora, but we have 29 million people who live in the Amazon that have to become visible. They cannot be seen just from a single angle, like the Amazon peoples who live in cities like Belém and Manaus, but you have riparian populations, indigenous peoples who have sometimes moved to cities, and there are others who live in complete remote areas that have to be respected in their heritage. We have extraction, economy-based peoples and slave descendants. It is an extraordinary opportunity. What we have to tap into is what Brazil can leave for the next day after the conference. And this is why I stress we must, as a nation, try and build a heritage of nature-based solutions, solutions based in the vocations of our country. And which are they? The forest is a vocation that we own. Our biodiversity is owned by us too. I can say here, as has Luana, that the carbon market is a new world commodity. The whole world is seeking economic alternatives in energy transition to decrease emissions. iFood, even if all of their vehicles are electrical, it will come to a time when emissions will not be zeroed out, and the difference will be offset by purchasing carbon credits. And so we have to present ourselves as a solution, as a regulated market with a sound legislation that so allows. On the other hand, we have the energy transition agenda. This all makes me very excited and absolutely convinced that with the peculiarities of Brazil, with our culture, with the peculiarities of the Amazon, we have a unique and extraordinary opportunity in our hands. I would like to invite all of those who have not come to Brazil yet to do so, to come to us. Those who have not been to the Amazon may come to Pará and taste its wonderful food and see its forest. I take your invitation, says Paes. There will be maniçoba, typical Pará dish, but there will also be black beans feijoada, which is a dish from Rio de Janeiro, to please Paes. So, about the agenda, this is very significant. There are so many urban areas in Latin America. What examples would you place in this agenda, and how does Rio play its role? Very, very briefly, extreme events are inevitable. despite all of our efforts, as we will see, and these scenes are repeated all over the world, and they have a major impact in cities. I think that Rio has a very impressive experience, which is the operations center, which is a center where you have all systems like meteorological information, police, street lighting, and everything gathered in a single office. So we can work preventively in order to minimize the impact of these events in people's lives. What we have seen in the state of Rio Grande do Sul this year, or later, earlier last year, was an example. There was no preparation for those circumstances in time of duration. I don't think there's anyone in particular to blame, but I think that the example of Rio de Janeiro is one that could have mitigated this kind of situation. Now, fair transition, Luana, and the role that companies like yours can play. iFood is a mirror of society, as are other companies. The social impact and our commitment for reducing social inequalities are very important in the private sector. We work in education, and we account for 2.3% of all of the adults that go through the specific exam offered by the Ministry of Education, which is a school catch-up program for dropouts, and we need to be mirror of a greener and fairer society. Only by having greater representation and being closer to problems can we find more efficacious solutions. So I would like to make a call for action for my counterparts, private initiative leaders. At what cost we have this social and environmental impact agenda? Who's going to pay for this, as I hear so often? It is immensely cheaper to do what we do rather than to live with inequalities and with the destruction of our planet. And not only that, there are ways of creating revenue while at the same time making companies catalysts of the social change we want to see in reality. I very much want to be present at COP, Governor. I don't need to be a VIP. I can just be a commoner, no problem. But it is an invitation for cooperation. We are living through an era where cooperation is so difficult. There are so many barriers and red tape and less trust between all of those involved. What we want is increasingly to have better solutions for those who are the most needed, with more cooperation. Thank you. Minister, Chief Justice, how can we use COP30 in order to take a quantum leap? How can the green Brazil become a reality and become an example? I think that Brazil today cannot be an industrial leader. I hope that we will get there sometime in the future. We cannot be a technological leader either. I hope that we will become so in the near future. But we have everything it takes to be an environmental leader for many reasons, because of the fact that energy in Brazil is predominantly clean, especially in electrical power. We have 3 times the world average. We have a great potential for sun, biomass, and wind energy. And we have the Amazon, which is the greatest environmental service renderer because of the water cycle and for storing carbon and for biodiversity. To conclude, I think that the world will live through a very difficult period, environmentally speaking, and I think that it will be one of resilience and resistance because of the triumphant comeback of denial. The idea that turning your back on a problem makes it go away. Something that I've learned in this world, you cannot, it's to no avail breaking a mirror just because you don't like the image. So I think that the world will live through this moment of resistance, but we must not let go of the struggle. History is not linear. You go back and forth, but we cannot just give in because the winds have changed. Our role must be that of pushing history in the right direction. Thank you all. We will all see you. I hope we will all see you at COP30. Come to Rio and São Paulo and to Brazil and make us